Subject to is becoming an increasingly popular strategy to buy real estate low and no money down. Now, it's not actually a strategy, it's just a clause in what's called contract for deed. We love contract for deed.
However, subject to sucks. And today we're going to talk about that. Hello and welcome to the channel. It is Cody and Christian, and today we're talking about creative financing. Specifically about a clause in a real estate contract called subject to. Now, what is subject to and why don't we use it?
Well, subject to basically, it means subject to existing debt. So if someone has a note, let's say they have 4% debt, 30-year financing on
That's great.
Yeah, they have a great debt product, and we're going to use this on a duplex because it's typically used on smaller properties. Okay. Not always, but typically.
Yeah.
So you're going to assume their debt, but they're going to keep paying it. So instead of an actual assumption, they're just going to keep paying their mortgage, and you're going to pay them.
So essentially, we're keeping an extra party in the picture, relying on them to fulfill their obligation that they're telling us they're going to do, even though they got themselves in a tricky situation. Because affluent people that are usually doing well, are not the recipients of something like this.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's a lot of bank debt that you can actually assume. So the bank will know what you're doing. You talk to the bank and say, hey, I would like to be assigned the existing note. And you'll go through the process. They'll underwrite you. And if you qualify, you can take the note. Subject to bypasses the bank and goes direct to the seller.
And typically, there's not a whole bunch of communication in that process, which is why we're not a huge fan of it. But that said, it's enough of telling you what not to do. What do we do? Because we built quite the portfolio over the course of the last 12 months.
So what we do is, and again, this is real estate contracts, this is seller financing, private capital when necessary, but we also are not using banks. We're just not circumventing the bank like you would in a subject to deal. We're buying it direct from the seller, and usually they're financing 90-95% of these sales, but we're talking to a seller, building a relationship, and off of the trust that we build and the actual deal, we're buying something that cash flows day one in long-term fixed rate debt directly with the seller.
Honesty and transparency are the key components to doing good business over the long term. And when it comes to doing actual subject to, if you are not telling everything to all parties, you're not just being dishonest, but you're not being transparent. And it requires both of those if you're doing good business. And so we do the seller finance route. We buy from people that don't get in positions where they have to sell and they have no equity and assets. However, if there were situations like that, our objective and our goal would be to just assume that mortgage. If we assume the mortgage and do a real estate contract for the rest, it puts us in good standings with all parties, and we don't like to add steps. We don't like to add partners where we don't need them to be. So we remove the seller from any obligations on this deal, and that is the biggest key component to doing good business and being able to do the creative finance play with no money out of pocket.
Yeah, it always comes down to how do we own it and how do we never lose it. When you add additional parties, you add additional steps, you're circumventing the bank.
And that's our rule number one, don't add steps. That is one of the most important principles that we do not violate.
Mm-hmm. And if you add these additional steps, each additional variable adds risk. Now, can you, in a subject to, insure against the bank finding out? Sure.
Yeah, you can.
However, again, steps and expenses. What happens when that seller runs into a bankruptcy, but they're the ones who are holding the note and have to pay the note? These are all complicated things that you have to figure out.
Now, if that's a risk you want to take, you're welcome to do that. But we follow principles that's allowed us to go very, very quickly in relationship to our goals.
Yep. The one other biggest difference, I think, between the way we buy and how you would do a subject to deal, you're typically going to be working with a distressed seller who has no other way to sell the asset. Otherwise, why would they want to hold the mortgage while you own the property? It doesn't make sense.
That's the last case scenario.
When you're doing the seller finance thing, you're building relationships and building off of trust. We're looking for masters of the game, like people who have played this at the absolute highest level. Some of our first deals, we actually just wrote up a deal today for a little duplex. And this duplex is paid by people who have hundreds of units, about 1,000 self-storage units. They own railroads. I mean, they own everything. They have mastered the real estate game.
And we're buying it on a real estate contract.
Mm-hmm. It just doesn't have a subject to clause, because when people play this game for a long time, you'll find what a lot of the masters of the game do is they lever up, they buy their stuff, and then they deleverage. They don't own debt.
There's a point where you should pay off the mortgages, and most people online aren't talking about that because that's not the super hot thing right now. Cheap debt, free money, 0% interest credit cards, it's all really hot because it allows you to grow quickly. However, if you look at the people who are true masters of the space, They lever up, and then eventually they do pay it back down. And that's the people that we choose to buy from. You can build your strategy off of either spectrum, either side of it. However, we chose the rich side, as Bradley would say.
If you want to build your strategy, I will say this about Subject 2. It is a legitimate, legal, zero down way to buy real estate. You can opt to do it this way. We will never do that because we don't have to. We bought over 100 units together.
Bought a resort.
All of the real estate you would ever need to buy, you can buy without using Subject 2 with the same zero amount down.
Yeah, you just have to make the decision to choose one strategy versus the other.
That's what I have for today on Subject 2. Cody, anything else you want to add to that?
Keep it simple, don't add steps, and we'll see you on our next video.
Like and subscribe. See you then.